Hello, hello, heartfelt leaders. This is Ashley Pitzer, your host with Practicing Life podcast. And today I have another guest that I am interviewing. His name is Kirk Westwood, and he is the author of The Very Best Bad Ideas. You probably can see for those watching on YouTube, his background. I want to read a little bit about his bio, and we're going to jump in and start asking him some questions. I'm super excited to have him. I met him through TikTok randomly, which is super cool, right? Because you can meet people anywhere. And his book sounds absolutely ideal for my audience. And knowing that, a lot of things happen in our lives, a lot of mistakes happen that lead to wonderful, good things. So let's learn a little bit about Kirk. Kirk Westwood is a storyteller. Did I say it wrong?
Kirk with a K. Kirk. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am saying that, but it doesn't come through. So I guess I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah.
Anyway, Kirk. There. That sounds better. Kirk Westwood is a storyteller. He is the founder and CEO, co-founder and CEO of Glass River Media, named a top 25 strategic communication agency by the Washington Business Journal. Kirk has contributed to Hollywood films, television programs, national commercials, and music videos. He has worked freelance as a photographer, blogger, web streamer, and consultant, and for the government as a communication specialist and public affairs specialist. No matter what his professional title has been, Kirk's job description has always been a variation of the same thing: to tell stories. When not working, Kirk creates stories with his 5 children and remarkable wife. He loves to solve, I'm going to blank on this, cryptograms, puzzles, and riddles, all in an effort to help him decode the most complex puzzle, the brain. So welcome to the podcast. I am so happy to have you. And, one of the reasons I brought you on this podcast is because I felt very motivated, especially with writing my first fantasy novel and putting it out into the world. And I just had this big heart for all of the people that have gone through the task of writing a book and the journey that it is, because it is definitely one that is in the trenches of looking at your own dark shadows and the things that you don't want to see. Everything comes up for you when you write a book. And so I put a call out to the world, that, hey, anybody who's self-publishing, anybody that's written a book, come onto my podcast. Let's hear it. And you were one of the people that responded. And so I want to hear all about your book. I want to know what caused you to write this book. So let's hear your story.
No, it's good. And it's one of those things, I could start it any number of ways, but because the story, as with your book, I'm sure with every book I've ever, the story starts a decade before the story starts, it all, or more, I have been, everyone has their own growing up story. I'm first grade through 9th grade. I never went to the same school 2 years in a row. I moved more or less every other year to every year, but because of district changes, or I went from middle school to high school or whatever, from 1st to 9th grade, I never attended the same school 2 years in a row. I never got into that stage of comfortability with my own ideas. I never got in that stage of where you got into a clique and a rhythm with your friends. I didn't have friends for longer than a few weeks or months until high school. And I'm still friends with one of the co-owners of my studio here, is a friend from high school. But I didn't meet anyone that had any kind of staying power or any kind of tribe, as it's called, or culture or group that I was consistent with until my mid to late teens. And then I went to film school. I moved to Los Angeles, and that's a very non-homogeneous, lots of different groups, lots of different opinions, lots of crazy creatives, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And due to kind of the housing crisis and the SAG strike and the writer strike in 2007, 2008, the film industry took about a 2-year blip, and I ended up not being able to survive it in Los Angeles with 2 children at the time.
Yeah.
So insert chapter here and there, I moved to DC, where I'd gone to high school. I lived here in I lived in the DC area where I am now in high school, and I moved back. And I got a job in the cutthroat, never say die world of government contracting. And I learned that is in fact where good ideas go to die. And I wish that I was kidding. I spent 3 years, and I'd gone from moving around all the time and meeting people of all these crazy diverse ideas and crazy. Then I moved to LA with people with just, what if we light it on fire? Like, I mean, there was no idea too bad. There was no idea that wasn't worth talking about. And suddenly I move into government contracting, and I'm doing the same thing. Like you said in my bio, I was doing the exact same thing. I was a video communications specialist, which meant I was a filmmaker. I had a video camera. I made different videos for different programs, and I was doing the same thing. And at one point, a project that had a significant price tag was held up for 9 months as I was done, and people were fighting over the color, size, and choice of font. And no, I'm not kidding. Like 9 months of it, traveling from department to department, me spending literal days and sometimes weeks going, I only have 2 projects on my desk right now, and both of them are on someone else's desk waiting for approval, but that person's on leave, and this person, and all of a sudden my life came to this kind of screeching halt of where, and I started just paying attention to people, paying attention to what they were doing. And a lot of these guys had been in the government for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I started paying attention in meetings and watching quirky off-color ideas get shot down hard. Like, shut up, Steve. Like, not now. This isn't the time for that. Go write your blog. Like there was no space for creative expression anymore. There was no culture for it. And so I started kind of talking to coworkers in other contracts, like friends that were in other government contracts. And I started reaching out and asking around about this and reading about this, because I hadn't experienced it. I had this whole life. I'd had this life of so much diversity and so much creativity and so much, that's somewhat misleading. I had spent my whole life learning about new cultures. Even if I was moving within the United States, I was moving across the United States, where if you're moving from Texas to Massachusetts, that's not the same culture anymore. Like, I spent my whole life learning about how am I going to fit into this culture. And all of a sudden I'm, in my 30s, and I am late 20s. I'm in my late 20s, and I'm in government contracting, and I am just utter culture shock. And I'm talking to a coworker one day about this problem we're having in the department. And he's like, what would fix this? And he lays out the most eloquent, simple, concise plan. I was like, dude, that's the idea. There it is.
You need the solution.
Let's go talk. And he's like, nope. And I was like, what do you mean no? Like, why no? That solves everything. And he says, look, I've been here for 17 years in the government, and I'm just tired of being told I'm stupid. I'm tired of no one even listening till I finish the paragraph. I'm tired of not being taken seriously because my ideas don't sound like theirs. So I'm going to finish, I'm retiring in 3 years. I'm going to go open a bakery, and I'm just going to bake the rest. I was like, this guy was Ivy League educated, brilliant, and had the creativity, ingenuity, innovation, and spark just beaten out of him. I was like, man, this just must be the government. I got to get out of government contracting. And so I started asking around and realized that wasn't the government, that was actually really, really common. And then I started kind of thinking about it and talking to more people and interviewing more people. And I realized that lots of my clients had experienced that. And in fact, LA is where you go when you're tired of hearing no. Like, I started reaching out to my old colleagues in Los Angeles, and that's why they'd moved to LA, somewhere that took dreams seriously. And so to make a long story longer, I decided that I was going to talk about bad ideas, and I reached out to some publishers, and I found one that would kind of coach me through it. And the first stage he's like, no one cares about bad ideas until you can explain about good ideas. You need to write me a book on the history of thinking. And that started the kind of multi-year thing of calling neurologists and psychologists and anthropologists and sociologists and every other ist possible, and just kind of chronicling why we're afraid of feeling stupid, why my friend would rather sit down and shut up than fear changing something. And that journey led me through, like you said, the highest I've ever been, the lowest I've ever been, the saddest I've ever been, the most defeated I've ever been. And it was a multi-year process of just learning why we as people function the way we do. And it became the very best bad idea.
I love it. And I've also have worked for governments. So I'm with you. And I know it's also in corporations as well. So it sounds really fabulous. I've never lived in LA, but it sounds very fabulous to be able to go to a place that possibilities are open. Just that alone is inspiring.
Absolutely. And I did love it. And I don't want to paint LA in a LA is also, as you'll hear, there's certainly a layer of fake to it, and there's certainly a level of cutthroat to it, and there's certainly a level of hyper competition. And the thing is that you can have a movie come out and absolutely flop, and someone will still give you it. Someone will still fund your next one. Someone will still give you, because as long as the idea is there and you have shown any degree of ability to make it, like if you only have one movie or a series of flops, it becomes harder. But like, as long as the idea is worth talking about, and often if it isn't, like there are movies out there that are some of my favorites, and I'm not going to plug any particularly by name, but there are movies out there that I joke around. I was like, I love this movie, but if anyone tells you they know what it's about, they're lying. Watch this movie. It's the craziest, strangest idea.
Yeah.
And that can exist, and I've seen it exist, and I've done it outside of LA. It doesn't need to be film. It doesn't need to be television. It doesn't need to be creative. I talk about this in the book as well. I got talking to accountants, and they're like, well, that's great in the creative industry, but I'm an accountant. I don't have room for creativity. And I'm like, you are so wrong. Math is remarkably creative. Math is insanely creative. We just don't teach math creatively. And if we did, that changes the picture.
Yeah. I mean, it really, whatever teacher you do have and how they feel about it passionately does affect everything. So now I'm kind of curious because one of the things that I do is study the brain. So when you're talking about all these isms, these ist, I mean, that is study. So I absolutely, well, I haven't, for all the audience, I haven't read this book yet. I've read about the book, but not the book itself. So please feel free to share what you want to share on the podcast without giving away everything, but from somebody who studies kind of how the brain functions, I definitely have my own bias, if you will, on things, as well as what I've experienced. So, have you looked at like hypnotism before? Have you?
So the short answer to that is, the short answer is not as much as I would like. And I mean that genuinely. I was talking to a hypnotist, a professional hypnotist, a year or two, kind of very early COVID. We were talking on the phone. The book was already out, so it wasn't regarding the book, but it was, and I'm super fascinated. I've watched a few documentaries, some of them a little more goofy and crazy out there than others that are far more about, but not in any substantive way. Like I don't want to pretend or flex like, oh yeah, totally. No, a little bit. I'm fascinated by it. I believe in the potential of it. I think that I have been professionally therapeutically hypnotized once, and I thought it was incredible. It was a great 4-hour experience that I genuinely enjoyed, but no, not so much.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be. So as a background for me, like I was a yoga instructor for 10 plus years. I still pop in and teach. It's almost impossible because anybody that knows me knows that I've taught and have taken one of my classes most likely, and then they want me to teach more. So it's like something you can never retire from. But anyway, meditation is very much like hypnosis.
Sure.
And so, but it doesn't need to be hypnosis. It doesn't need to be meditation. It can be any number of things that kind of transports your mind into possibility. So
Absolutely.
when you wrote this book, was this book something along the lines where you interviewed all these people and it was like a chicken noodle soup and you kind of incorporated their stories into your book, or did you collectively look at the data and kind of like give people synopsis of what is most common?
Oh, it's a super good question. So, so this isn't uncommon from other nonfiction authors I've talked to. The book I started writing is not the book that I finished
Oh
at
yeah.
all. It's like they like unrelated, not the same title. The original title was Release the Creative, which is now a section of the book is called Release the Creative. The second title of the book was called Make Friends with the Mouse, and there's reasons for that. The third title is I set out to write a story about how you shouldn't be afraid to be creative, release the creative. And it was about that. And I was talking to my editor, and he was like, okay, so, write out kind of what you're thinking, and don't go for confirmation bias. Very genuinely and legitimately find, you don't have an education in this, so to speak of. I have a master's degree in public relations and an undergrad in film and television. So like, I don't have a credential that would make me technically, allowed to speak about really any of this. So I was like, well, I just kind of want to ask people. So I called NYU and I asked to talk to someone in their neuroscience department. And I had a 2 hour, and someone was like, absolutely, that sounds great. I called Georgetown and I asked to talk to someone in their philosophy department, and they gave me an associate professor to speak to. And we had a great 3-4 hour conversation. I started calling around these universities and these places, and I didn't tell them what I wanted them to say. I asked them so why do we do this? What's going on? Explain this to me. But why this, that? And I just started taking notes. And then I would sometimes follow up with them in a subsequent interview, or I would then take that interview and then do a subsequent interview with someone else and ask them their thoughts on this new information that I had. And it just kept whittling down and whittling down and whittling down to sometimes my theories were completely disproven. Like I was thinking about it entirely wrong. And other times they were expanded upon in ways that I might have well have been wrong because I was so small in the idea that it was so different or bigger than I thought. And I conducted several hundred interviews over a 1.5 to 2 year period. I tried to do 3 interviews a week, ranging anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours long. And I just tried to kind of schedule them out. And I tried to spread them out across, academia, professionals, educated, not educated. I tried to get as common an opinion as possible, as well as uncommon. And what amazed me is just kind of through the law of attraction and through that positivity and through practicing what I ended up writing about, I just got lots of yeses. Like after the book was done, I wanted blurbs written about it. So and Mark Randolph, the CEO of Netflix, had just released his book called That'll Never Work. So like, that sounds just like my book. Cool. So I sent him a LinkedIn message. I'm sorry, Mark, when you get inundated by LinkedIn messages. I sent him a literal LinkedIn message. It was like, hey, Mr. Randolph, my name is Kirk. Would you be willing to read my book and review it? And he's like, sure, Kirk, send it over. And like, we ended up talking, and that's on my website, verybestbadidea.com. The nicest thing ever been written about me was written by a man I'd never met who agreed to read my book. Just as you stop being afraid of being told no, you stop being told no. And when you're told no, it stops mattering very much. Like I was also told no by a lot of people, but the yeses I got were incredible. And so, I just interviewed anyone who I thought might have an opinion, whether they were a professional creative, a professional non-creative, doctors, lawyers, philosophers, neuroscientists, and just kind of this phoenix from the ashes just kind of grew out of it.
Yeah, I love that. And, one of the questions I actually had for you was like, hey, what were some of the people that you met along the way? I guess it sounds like you've met a lot of people along the way, not only in the book, but then after the book.
Absolutely. No, I mean, and the book came out and as happens with the books in this space, I was asked to be a speaker in a bunch of places, and I've been interviewed on podcasts, and I've had people reach out to me. And yeah, like a tattoo shop in Utah flew me out to speak to they had a class of entrepreneurial tattoo artists. They were aspiring younger artists that both the tattoo business is really hard, being a tattoo artist is really hard. The stigma around being a tattoo artist can be hard. And these were young, most of them young 20s to mid 20s. These were young aspiring entrepreneurial tattoo artists, and a tattoo shop flew me out to speak to a class of 25 entrepreneurial tattoo artists about, yeah, let's do it. And so I got to meet these incredible artists, and I've got to meet these incredible people and see incredible things and learn about how creativity has, and being willing to look stupid can change. Just being just unafraid of looking dumb changes everything.
You might find this really interesting, but I'm working on the sequel to my book, my fantasy book. And so there is a section in this book where I am talking about magical creatures and kind of the history of how we became humans. Like, why aren't there vampires and whatnot? And so in this storyline, it is all about, it's all about people who are kind of going, this is me tying in my hypnosis stuff and how the brain works. Okay. So even though it's a fantasy story, I'm throwing in little things that are relatable with the brain. And so anyway, it's all about this process of when you let fear, when you let jealousy, when you let sadness come into your heart and your mind, when it becomes this consuming thing, you transition into this human, but you still have the magic of creativity, even though you're no longer a mermaid or a vampire or a werewolf or whatever it is. You're still a human with magic of creativity. So don't lose that.
Sure. No, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's how strongly I feel like creativity is the magic.
This ties into that. I was just talking to one of my daughters like last week, and I was like, do me a favor, define magic for me. And she's like, and she just kind of slack-jawed, like I was like, come on, it's not hard. I mean, like, I don't mean stage magic, I don't mean fake magic, I mean define Harry Potter mystical magic. What does it mean? And she kind of stumbled over and was like, can I offer a definition? She's like, sure. It's like being able to do something with your mind without touching it. Would that be magic? And she's like, absolutely, that's magic. And I was like, okay, work with me here for a second. I am going to, in my mind, formulate all my life experiences into a thought. I'm going to use my mouth to vibrate air send vibrations through the air into your ears to have my life experience unfold into your imagination. I was like, that is speaking, and that is magic. I can use words, and I can use sounds and words and written things to communicate the innermost, deeply recessed parts of my brain. And if I do it correctly, I can have that realized in your brain. How is that different than moving a spoon on a table?
Yeah.
It's harder than moving the spoon on the table. I'm doing something more difficult than that, but because communication is something we do so constantly, we forget how creative and capable and magical it is.
It really is. I mean, to take something and allow somebody to see the same image as what's in your mind is pretty remarkable. And I really know how important that is, especially when I was like trying to get artists to create the people that I see in my mind for my story. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, we're seeing different things here.
Right. And it's so fat. Like, I will absolutely, pick up your book. And as I read it, each page, it's not just the story you're telling, but it's also the story you're not telling. It's the world you're building. You're sharing a piece of who you are, whether or not you intend to. You don't get much of a say once you've put it out there. And that's back to that's why people are so afraid. If you don't like my story, you must not like me. And you must it's very personal, but it's also very freeing. I'll get to read your book and see each page of it and get to know not just the story you wanted to tell, but who you are and what story was important to you and worth the pain of writing a book. Because you and I both know writing a book is not a pleasant experience. It's very hard.
Yeah.
But it's magic. It's someone reading your words or listening to you speak and hearing what you think and intend. When that happens effectively, it's indistinguishable from magic.
I agree with you. I love it. And I would also say that like when you were writing your book, there's
Sure.
a stretching process that happens. And that stretching process, that's the painful part. That's the part where you have to face all of these things that you don't want to face. But then you evolve to a different person and then you get stretched more. Like it's never ending. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It really is like, Sisyphus walking up the hill. It's like, okay, when I get around, I'm going to get it a little bit further. And then you kind of, nope, it's a little bit further. And what's really funny is, so my publisher had a soft policy that they tried to have books in the section, in the segment that I was releasing, they tried to have their books roughly 50,000 words. And so I wrote my first draft. It was like 20 some odd thousand. And they're like, no. And like you said, stretch it out. You should add another section that really kind of fills in this section. So, really quick overview. Like I said, my first book was called Release the Creative. It's now the third section. And my publisher came back and said, this is really great, but I need a section in front of this that talks, if you're going to talk about how to release the creative, you need to talk at first and define what creativity and nonconformity kind of is. So then I wrote this whole kind of other book. It was, this first kind of preface, this first other section that I'd never intended to write. It was just my publisher saying, look, for them to care about section 3, section 2 needs to exist. And so I fleshed this whole thing out, and that was so I submitted the book the second time. They said, okay, love it. The problem is now that you're talking about conformity, and now that you're talking about, creativity and non-conformity and creativity, you should probably talk about conformity and why people think the way they do in the first place. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I had to write a third book. I mean, it's all the same book, but this third whole section that went into literally the first section of the book is called The History of Thinking. And it again, I talked to so many people about it, and I built out this story about the history of thinking and the history of conformity and the history of fitting in before I get to the second section, which is all about nonconformity and looking stupid. And to get to the third section, which was the book I intended to write about, you should just be creative when you want to be. And when we finally finished and the dust settled, my draft was 78,000 words.
Ooh.
And they're like, you got to pare that back, man. We said 50. I was like, oh, screw you. No, like, this is like draft 3,000. It's a tight 78. The Audible is 5.5 hours long, which isn't even particularly long in book speak. Like, it's like, and I had to kind of push back and fight with them a little bit, but finally they sent it to a bunch of different editors and Reddit. They're like, no, we agree. It can't get much shorter without us removing things we told you to put in. So it's, 78,000 words, but that was after over a year of being told to add to it things I'm not an expert in. I had no opinion on. I just wanted to talk about this third thing. And it became much bigger.
And see, one of the reasons I love this is because the brain doesn't like the unknown, and you were forced to be put in a situation where you're like, I don't know these things. I have to go and find them, which also, again, proves your point in your book of why we do certain things or why we don't do certain things.
Absolutely.
So what do you feel like was like some of your, I won't say number one, but some of your fears that you kind of had to like, wrestle with, overcome, face?
In writing the book or just in general life?
Well, let's go with the book.
Okay. Like I was saying, this isn't fiction to the point where I can go, oh, that, I have a different story. Like, this was me sharing truly the deepest kind of the core of my thoughts on how I think about things. And as I talk about in the introduction and in the last thing, I am very neurodivergent. I learned through my process of being bullied a lot and growing up and everything. So me just kind of finally saying, you know what, I'm coming out and I'm going to lay it all out there, was exciting. But even though the whole book is about not being afraid of looking stupid, the fact of the matter is I'm still a person. And I was really afraid of like, dude, you are going to be torn apart. People are going to look at this and go, oh, well, I guess we're not hiring that guy. He's crazy. Like, I own a business. My business supports my not just myself, but my colleagues and coworkers and subordinates and things. Mm-hmm. Me coming out and saying everything you know is wrong and your worst idea is your best, that's a bold claim. It's also a moronic claim that makes people very uncomfortable. And I talk about that in the introduction, where I say, as I posed this statement to more people, more experts, more people on the street, as I posted more, some people really got it and really got excited. And some people got like noticeably, viscerally angry. And they started to be like, well, that's just, no, you can't say you. And as I tried to peel that back, and I realized that they didn't know why it made them angry. It just made them very uncomfortable. That I was saying that their worst idea, the thing that they were afraid to talk about, that actually might be a really good idea, and you shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. You could see often how angry that made, not at me, but them. They're like, no, I can't talk about this. People won't like it. They'll think I'm stupid. I can't. People got defensive at me sharing my idea, like not at me attacking their idea. I would share mine and they would get defensive. And I watched it happen more and more and more. And I was like, I'm onto something. This is making people very, very uncomfortable. And as I dug through it, I found out they didn't know why. They just knew that they had ideas that they weren't sharing and wanted to. And that, even for me, to answer the question, it still came with a lot of risk on my part, because I watched people get very angry with me as I was kind of postulating. And so sending that out into the world was scary. Now, very, very scary.
Did you do ARC readers, or did you just put it all out there? I mean, you obviously had your team that read it and they gave you some type of support system, but.
So any chapter that featured an interview or a person, I sent that chapter to that person and I asked them a couple of, like, hey, what do you think? Was I true and honest in my telling of that? And what do you think of my point? And most people are like, this is awesome. This is great. Some people like said, I know I said that because I recorded all the interviews. I know I said that, but would you mind like helping me say it a little differently? Because I was like, not a problem at all. And so we did that. And some of my favorites, actually, one of the academic institutions that interviewed me a fair amount, that I interviewed a fair amount, I sent it to them and they said, all your facts are right. I can't say that I agree with your conclusion, but you supported it well. Like, and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay with you not agreeing with me. Yeah. The last chapter of the book is entitled Everything in This Book is Wrong. And I go in about how the whole point is that we're always learning and we're always learning and we're always growing and we're always figuring out new stuff. So for me to write a book and then say, these are the facts, well, that defeats the entire point of the book. I released it knowing that it might be entirely wrong, but I'm okay with that because that's the point. Yeah. I'm putting it out there for people to attack and tell me not just that's wrong. Okay, what part? Help me dig into it. Where did I mess it up? Because it needs to be right for me. Yeah.
I would tell you, like, as I'm listening to you, I'm like, well, you're obviously in the wrong career. I'm like, you're obviously a coach. So no, but what I notice is that most people really don't know themselves. They know about themselves, but they really don't know themselves. And yeah, go ahead. I see you say something.
So I swear I could do an hour-long keynote on this next thing, and I'm going to try very hard to keep it very, very concise. But so the release the creative is, of course, a statement to release the Kraken. I actually have a full arm tattoo of the Kraken because of this, of what I'm about to explain. And that is that, and I talk about this in the book. The Earth is covered in 70% water. 70% water. Yeah,
and so is our body. We're like 70%.
Very true. The current biologists estimate the amount of the sea life and sea floor that we have mapped and the sea exploration that has been done is between 9 and 11%. So let's call it 10. Okay. So 10% of 70% of our planet has been cataloged and researched and understood to its fullest, right? Okay. And we have billionaires out there, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, et cetera, that are rushing to Mars and the moon and the cosmos. We have the James Webb Telescope and we have the Hubble Telescope and we have all of these satellites going outward. And we still only know about 10% of 70% of ourselves. Yeah. Our own body, our own planet, our own celestial vehicle, we know strangely little about. And there's so much because we're looking out. And that is a perfect allegory for most people, myself included. This is not pointing fingers. Like, I learned so much about myself writing a book when I was forced to answer questions that I'd never been asked before. And the reason I mentioned the Kraken is the Kraken was first mentioned by the King of Norway in I've forgotten the year, like 1054, 1074, somewhere in the 1000s. Since then, it has been referenced by Jules Verne. It's been referenced by thousands of writers. It's this mythological thing. But at the time, the biggest sea creature, the biggest octopus or cephalopod we knew of was the Great Pacific Octopus, which is 12 feet-ish. Until 2004, we found a first great squid. And then 2012, when we found a colossal squid even bigger than that. And then in 2000, I don't remember at this moment, when we found portions of a squid inside of a blue whale, that if the proportions were correct, this squid was over 100 feet long. And this giant squid and the was a myth until, it still is a myth by strict definitions, but we live on a planet with roommates we don't know. We have thoughts and feelings that we haven't explored. We have things about ourselves that we haven't addressed, but we're still working on going to Mars. And I'm not trying to cast, let's go to Mars. That's a cool idea. But we shouldn't stop looking in the ocean. And so the tattoo on my arm is actually the Kraken lifting a ship over rocks, because most Kraken artwork is them destroying something. They're very destructive because we are trained as children to be terrified of things we don't know. There's a sea creature out there. It must want to eat me. There's something I can't see in the ocean. It must want me dead. It must be able to swallow an island, swallow a cruise ship. It must be out for blood, when there's obviously no evidence to support that. There's just as much evidence to support that the Kraken is out there tugging lost sea ships around problems. I mean, equal, which is to say none of either. But instead of choosing to be afraid of the unknown, assume that the Kraken is there to help you. Assume that the Kraken's the reason you are not going to die at sea. He's going to tug you out of the doldrums. We can choose. We can make a choice to be afraid of the unknown, be afraid of our bad ideas, or we can make a choice to go, you know what? Maybe this idea will make me look stupid, or maybe it won't. And we have that choice to make. And we shouldn't choose to be afraid of looking stupid.
Yeah. And then I would further coach. I would further coach and ask, why are you labeling this as a bad idea in the first place? Who defined this as a bad idea?
And there it is. And there it is. It like, and be like, well, it's about it. So this title, the third title, finally arose of, at the time, my team was about 5 people that worked at my company, 7 total, me and the partner, and we had 5 employees. And I got to this point where, as kind of a joke to encourage things, I was like, okay, everyone, I have a really bad idea. Like, I have, this is terrible. And I would just preface it because in so many aspects of my life, had found more and more people just kind of like, oh, geez, like eye rolling at things. So I walked into, like, you can't tell me it's bad. I told you it's bad. Like, I have a terrible
like
idea.
Self-preservative.
It started off as a self-defense. It started off as like, okay, here's a bad idea. And then I started noticing that when I did that, people listened to the idea more. They were more willing to prove me wrong that it wasn't a bad idea than if you say, oh my gosh, I have the best idea. People immediately go, that won't work, Kirk. You have forgotten all about X. But if I come in and go, I have an idea, it's probably not going to work, but people are like, you know what? That probably could work. People look for the right if you say it's wrong, and people look for the wrong if you say it's right. So the idea was, with the very best idea was, I'm not going to let you label the idea. It's the very best bad. It just go with your ideas until you can make it work.
Yeah. For me personally, I feel like most of everything is reversed. It is flipped. And so, and then it becomes really hard because you see it one way, and to flip something, intuitively you've been taught, no. And so you do have this moment. Like, one of the things that we talked about prior to coming on to the podcast today was just like, one of the lessons that I teach people, one of the lessons I've learned is everything you want is on the other side of fear. So your life keeps getting repeated in the same Groundhog Day because we can't, not always, but there's times when we don't face our fear, and that's when we repeat it. So you go through this journey of facing this fear, and you get to the other side, and now you have a new Groundhog Day. but I do see that everything is kind of flipped. Like in my own personal life, I was taught, that, for instance, like one of the things that led me into coaching was the fact that I had gone to like counseling forever. This is what you were told to do. And I was like, I hate this. Like I have a special needs kid, right? And so part of the advice that they will give you, hands down, they will give this to everyone, is we'll go to a support group. Well, when I went to a support group, everybody just talked about how difficult it was. And I'm like, this isn't for me. This doesn't work for me. Like it had to be flipped. Like I need to go to places where we talk about how awesome it is to have a special needs kid. Like I need something different. But I was also raised differently than other people. I was a foreign exchange student. I was mute as a kid. I was alone by myself. So I wasn't raised kind of in this, bubble that a lot of people are in, because I had my own little personal bubble. So it's just, so sometimes I'm like, it takes a lot sometimes to reach people at their core, because there is so much programming that goes on. So I'm very excited about this book. And what do you think people are going to experience when they read it?
So it's one of two things. It really is. And I mean, it's a divisive book, and not because I'm controversial in it. I tried to be entertaining, for the record. I tried to keep it very light and fun. I mean, at one point I talk about how mankind rode into battle on the Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'm dead serious. That's in the book. I talk about how the founding fathers descended Mount Vernon with the Constitution written on stone tablets by the finger of the great Almighty. And then I immediately go in to say, or I might be getting my internet stories mixed up, but like, I tried to make it as fun as possible. I tried to make it as accessible as possible. I didn't want it reading like a textbook or a philosophy book. As much as I like textbooks and philosophy books, I wanted it to feel fun. Mm-hmm. But in my experience from talking to people, a large portion of people tell me it just really made them question everyone I've talked to that has offered me their opinion has said it made them kind of really question a lot. A significant number of them would say, and it really helped them through a thing or look at a thing different, or even if it didn't help them on a specific thing, it just helped them see the world a little differently. The other group is same reaction, different reaction to it. That, like I said, they didn't like how cavalier I was with some of these things, how telling them that their secrets aren't as bad as they think and getting things out there. And a lot of people there's a chance you'll feel uncomfortable at things I'm postulating. There are things that I say that they are opinions, or they are my statements that can make people go, well, that's not right. That's not true. Cool. Email me. Let me know. I want to know where I messed up. I want to have the conversation, because I make no pretense that everything in that book is 1,000% correct. It's just my perspective right now. But it will make you question things. And a lot of times that will be good, but depending on what you decide to question, because I don't tell you what to question, but deciding what you choose to question, it might be uncomfortable.
And for somebody who coaches, this makes me ecstatic. I'm like ready to high five you, like, because to question something, I think, is truly one of the best freedoms that we have. It's when you fail to question something that you're really giving up part of your freedom. But people don't know that.
I was just having this conversation just the other day, like within the last 5 days. I was like, I truly don't care if people think I'm stupid. I don't care if you agree with me. I don't care if you disagree with me. I don't care. The only thing that bothers me in this entire world about talking to people, I will get into debates with alt-right, crazy left. It doesn't matter. I will engage. But the moment they stop listening, and it's like, nope. No. The moment you aren't willing to walk me through it, like, I'm not trying to prove you wrong. I need you to help me understand. I'm going to question things. And the minute you stop being a part of the conversation and you just stand like Stonewall, That bothers me because, like, how is that helping you or me? Like, how is shutting the communication good for anyone? There's no wrong opinion. That's not true. But like, there's no bad opinion. An opinion, perspectives are earned. You earned your perspective. Even if your perspective is wrong, you earned it. Your life experience got you to where you are. Every opinion you have, you earned. Someone put it there. You got there somehow. You didn't just decide one day a thing you fundamentally believe. You earned that. The only thing in this world that truly bothers me is when people aren't willing to engage with themselves on why they believe the things they believe. You can believe whatever you want. I have no opinion on what your opinions are, but I want you to know why you believe things. And last little, when I was a kid, my dad would kind of debate me on kind of everything. Like, I would say capital punishment is wrong, and he would debate it. And I'd say this is wrong, and he'd debate it. And I'd say capital punishment is right, and he would debate it. And kind of at the end of no matter what my stance was, he was the opposite. I was in my 20s before I found out that my father was actually fairly liberal, because while still being fairly conservative, because my dad was my entire life whatever I wasn't. If I had an opinion, he was the other one. And he ended basically and it wasn't as argumentative or combative as it might sound, but every conversation he ended with, Kirk, I do not care what you believe, but you're going to know why you believe it. And I'm okay with you believing anything you want, but you have to be okay with asking questions, even of your own beliefs. You can't just stand on because I said so, or because I feel it, or because that's how you earned your perspective. Know how you got there.
You know, that's one of the things that blew my mind when I first started studying hypnosis, was that a belief is just something you believe is true. Like, it's that simple. And it's like, wow, my whole world is just built on random things that I decided to believe was true or not true. Like, and I learned how little facts there really are in this life. And that was mind blowing too, because
it makes people really uncomfortable.
Well, I still today, like, I'll be walking around and be like, is that really there? Is this really true? I'm like, I just like freak myself out with these moments. But it's because I like it.
Everything in this world, everything is way more nuanced than people are willing to admit. And people are like, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. I'm like, I am not saying this isn't. I agree, this is right and this is wrong, but you have to, the world isn't black and white. And actually, that's just really dark gray and really light gray. The world is infinitely nuanced. And anytime you try to make a blanket statement on anything, I mean, even scientific theorems, you know, the not to go down this rabbit hole, but the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2022, where was people proving, air quotes, proving sections of Einstein's theory of relativity, considered the mainstay of physics for the last, decades and decades. I'm not going to pretend like I know the number. Was incorrect. So even things that are facts and benchmarks, and I'm not saying, I'm not a nihilist who believes in nothing. I'm actually the opposite. I believe in everything. I believe there is truth in everything. You just need to find the edges of that truth. You need to find out why your bad idea, why is it bad? Why do you think it's bad? Who made you think it's bad? Who made you think you're bad? I don't believe in nothing. I believe in everything. I believe that there is truth to be found in every concept, and we just have to explore that.
And I love it. And I'm so glad to have you on the podcast and to be able to talk to you and learn more about your book. I guess I would ask you if there's any final notes that you wanted to, sign off on. Like, are you having any presentations coming up, or webinars that people can join you on? Is there anything that we'll be putting in the show notes to lead people to?
That's a really cool question. It's interesting just to the effect of, this is the second time I've said laws of attraction on this particular, and law of attraction isn't something that I am a particular or specific advocate of, but I had I had a full speaking tour scheduled, and then the pandemic kind of shut it down, and the world started waking up. And I had literally just been talking to people in my life. I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to start trying to get my book back out there and trying to start, realiving. That's resuscitating my
realiving is a hot word right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, totally. Like, stop trying to make fetch happen. Anyway, for those who get that joke, cool. I just started trying to resuscitate the speaking tour, and literally like day one of that, I came across your TikTok saying, if you're an author, reach out to me if you want to be on my podcast. I was like, let's start there. So the answer to your question is no, I don't, but I'm on a journey. This is a mission of mine that the pandemic genuinely kind of put a big foot out and tripped me up a little bit, but I'm heading out there. Check out my website, the verybestbadidea.com. I'm on Amazon. Reach out to me. I'm happy to engage anyone on anything. I love talking about this stuff. So no, there's nothing they can reach out to, but please just reach out to me if you want to talk.
I love that. And I guess is there a sequel to this book? Is there a buddy, a sister, brother coming out? That's not a sequel, but
three very quick answers to that question. One, yes, I've decided. I was writing a second book about the nature of creativity and to define creativity and define art. One person says it's art, one person says it's garbage. Like, let's define what does art mean? And I was halfway through a draft on that, and I ended up actually putting that on the back burner because of everything I just said about the pandemic and everything, and I have learned a lot. I'm actually working on I'm actually working on the Very Best Bad Idea second edition, where I kind of, because this came out in April of 2020, the pandemic isn't in there, and the response to, like, there's a lot of things that I think that I could sharpen up and make better that I am doing. So that's the sequel, The Very Best Bad Idea. But I'm also working on, this is hysterical, I think, you might not think so, but it's a bad idea that I think is going to work. And it's called Collaborate, Cooperate, and Laugh, a picture book for executives. Okay. And there's a book that I started writing a few years ago, but I was having a hard time doing what we explained of expanding it into anything more than just, it was a pamphlet. And I was like, I can't release a brochure, and I don't want to force this to be a book. And my daughter, she's in high school. She's an artist, and she's a very brilliant artist. And so I talked to her. I was like, do you want to illustrate a children's book? And so I'm rewording it away from being this kind of high-minded book about management theory, and I'm parsing it down to being remarkably simple. And it's going to be 20, 30 pages, illustrated like a children's book, called Collaborate, Cooperate, and Laugh, a picture book for executives.
Well, I love it. Actually, I do know another book that teaches this on a different concept, but the same. It's an adult book, but it's totally like written as if it's a kid's book. But
I love that I didn't come up with that. No, that's great.
Yeah. So I do know another, and it's done well. So, well, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom. And I look forward to following you and learning more about all of the editions that you're adding.
Absolutely.
So
likewise, I'm looking forward to your book as well.
Thank you. All right, everybody, take care. I love you. I will see you next week. Bye.